Alright, so you might remember a few years ago when Universal supposedly wanted to reinvigorate the old monsters from the older movies from the 30s and like the James Whale age and all that, and the Todd Browning age. And they tried to kind of start that off with Dracula Untold, but as most of us know, Dracula Untold was a total piece of shit. So and most people seem to see this, so they just said, screw it, we'll throw that away and hopefully start again. Which is how we ended up with a Mummy movie that kind of surprised everybody by starring Tom Cruise, of all people, who lately has been in a very good place as far as the content he's putting out as far as action movies go. Like, the Mission Impossible movies keep getting better, and obviously there's Edge of Tomorrow. And he's just showing how dedicated he is to making this genre as big as it can go and as real as it can go, really getting involved in the stunt work and all that, despite still being this million-dollar superstar. And so we kind of thought, okay, then let's see what's going on. I know a lot of people got really upset, and I think that probably also has a lot to do with the early reception that it got. That is so far the reviews and reactions have been very, very unkind, which I suppose I understand, but I know a lot of it comes from a lot of people didn't feel we needed another Mummy movie, and a lot of people really like Stephen Sommers' movies starring Brendan Fraser. I don't know, because we had the original with Boris Karloff, and then I believe there was another one in the 50s era with Peter Cushing. And then we had Stephen Sommers' movies. And Stephen Sommers' movie was also much like a movie called, I think, The Mummy's Hand, which was in, like, the 40s or something. And so bringing Tom Cruise in was kind of like, well, okay, let's see. This odd choice, but let's see what happens. And let's see if we can build a universe on this. And let's see if Tom Cruise can start another franchise. Obviously, that was questionable, because, like, the first thing I thought, like, you almost want to go into a denial when a movie you hope will be good gets received very, very badly, especially at the very last minute. So, you think, what could have gone wrong? And then you remember, oh yeah, less than a year ago we had Jack Reacher 2. And then it started to turn into, well, Jack Reacher 2 makes anything possible. Tom Cruise is no longer invincible when it comes to this genre, regardless of his dedication. So, I don't know if it was the extremely lowered expectations that came, because I really try to not let anything factor in before I go into something as far as other people's reactions, but it was hard to ignore just how scathing the first reactions to this movie were, and still continue to be, to my understanding. So, I don't know if it has anything to do with that really, really lowering my expectations, or what. Or, please don't murder me, I'm really not big on the Stephen Sommers movies, much at all. So, I didn't really have a bar going into this except Tom Cruise, really. So, I honestly don't think it's near as bad as people have been letting on, but there are issues about. So, starting with, it is very interesting that, I mean, Tom Cruise is still million-dollar star, but his movies haven't exactly been as box office smashing as they have been in the past. So even with him attached, it does seem a little bit ambitious that they actually have already gone into a Dark Universe logo, where it's the Universal logo, and then we kind of spin around to the back and it gets dark and brown looking, and the Dark Universe has a logo now. We didn't get a full-on big DC logo until Wonder Woman last week. And like the Marvel one only is just getting bigger and bigger as it goes. And the Dark Universe that may possibly not even go past this movie has already started there. I know, like, I think the next thing they're looking at is The Invisible Man starring Johnny Depp. I don't know. That could always fall through, because we know how Johnny Depp works these days. Um, but it's set up enough here to where I am a little interested in what they do. One of the complaints that I heard a lot was that, obviously the director and co-writer is Alex Kurtzman, who was a major writer on The Amazing Spider-Man 2, which obviously was a failed attempt to go into a big, franchise or universe or whatever, and ended up being a stopping point. And people were basically saying that he made the same mistakes here by trying to pack in too much and trying to start a universe with so much. There's really not a lot in here that does that. There's hardly sequel baiting. There's no post-credit scene. And the only other major monster we bring into this is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. But the thing is Jekyll and Hyde kind of fit into the story pretty seamlessly. He plays a major part throughout the movie. So I'm not really getting this complaint that it was too focused on trying to set up a franchise, because really it's pretty focused on the story itself. As far as within the story, you might have stuff that goes all over the place, but as far as one full thread, it doesn't feel too much like it's trying to branch off or trying too hard to be, the starting point to a universe, at least as far as I saw. There are obviously little, like, Easter eggs and shit in there, but, nothing that really feels like they strayed away from the one movie they were making and tried to focus on bigger things. It seemed relatively focused as far as just staying in one place without trying to branch off and try to say, hey, we're the next cinematic universe or whatever. Except for that, as I said, maybe jumping the gun logo. Though it does start off a bit, it does kind of give you the messy vibes at the very beginning, because it starts off and we're like in the year 1100 and something, and then we kind of get just a little taste of what happened in the past, and then we immediately jump forward to Jekyll in the place and finding the stuff, and then Jekyll narrates to us what happened in the past. So we give you a little sliver of the past, just to jump all the way to the present, just to go all the way back, when you could have just had the whole prologue by itself with Jekyll narrating. It would have seemed less like it was so jumbled there before we even saw the title. But anyway, and going on, besides that, the prologue is fine. There's really not a whole lot as far as, obviously the story is different in a way, but it does feel similar to the opening prologue to Stephen Sommers' movie, when we get that mummy's backstory, the Arnold Vosloo mummy. And then we get forward now in present day, and I think this was probably another complaint, and I know a lot of people really liked that the Sommers movie went into kind of like this, because it was set in the time period that it had this very old-fashioned adventure movie feel. So it was probably also a bit sneered at that this movie takes place in present day. I don't know, if you were gonna do something different with the Mummy franchise and try to make a new Mummy franchise, I do think that's an interesting place to start, to just kind of have a whole new setting. And it's not typical that we see movies like this outside of straight-to-DVD land, where a story like this actually takes place within the present day. And I do understand how that seems like it could totally be setting up for a fall, and how there's that takes a whole aspect away, a very, very large aspect away from the 99 movie that a lot of people found appealing. So I do understand where a lot of this is coming from, but still, I do think it's interesting that they did try to shake it up and tried to kind of play with this. It didn't have to necessarily be in that time period. It could very much be also thrown into this and kind of give it a modern day kind of action feel. Because I know that the complaints seem to be that it seems like he's still in Mission Impossible mode when he's supposed to be doing a Mummy movie. And I was really trying to bat away these bad reviews in my head, so my first thought was, I don't know, a Mission Impossible movie with mummies? I don't know, that sounds kind of cool. Let's see, in a big dumb action way? Let's see what this movie wants to do. But I do understand there are the two big stunts in this movie, the zero gravity and the plane, and the underwater thing. Yes, these were the big stunts in Rogue Nation. I'm aware. Both of them. And obviously in Rogue Nation, the big thing was that when he was on the plane, it was for real, and you can pretty much tell that most of it is CGI, with the exception of like the foreground set in the plane sequence in this. Mainly because that plane in Rogue Nation was taking off, and this one's plummeting to the ground. It's a little easier to not fake taking off, I think, than it is plummeting to a crash. But still, that scene is really intense. The plane scene is really good. But there is some stuff here also in this start, before it even really becomes a Mummy movie, that are a bit questionable. And I'm pointing a big, giant finger at, it may be the middle one, it may be a scolding one, but it is Jake Johnson, of course. Because you see Jake Johnson is one of the major characters in this, and your immediate thought, obviously, is, gee, I wonder who the comedy sidekick is. And gee, I wonder if he is annoying as fuck. Jake Johnson's can certainly have his moments, mainly in, like, that Joe Swanberg place, like in Digging for Fire and stuff like that, or Drinking Buddies. He's great in stuff like that. In these big budget movies, like his little wannabe Goldblum part in Jurassic World or whatever, it's, I don't know, because here's the thing is, there were a lot of writers on this movie, and yes, that is usually a kiss of death, so the very interesting thing is how many moments in this movie there are where people are supposed to be kind of having banter or dialogue or whatever, and it just seems like there's gaps in it. Like, there will be people and it's not even like, we said something funny, let's wait for the laugh track. It's not even that. It is just normal dialogue, and they just pause a lot. Like, the characters have nothing to say to each other, even though they are digging for a mummy, and getting into gun battles, and avoiding explosions. And the most they do is they tend to stutter towards each other, and there's a lot of Cruise just shrugging in response to stuff that Annabelle Wallis is telling him. And it happens so often, after a while you start to wonder, it's like, is this some character trait that's just not working very well? Or is this Cruise with no direction getting caught on camera? Where it's like, okay, Tom, action, and because his character's doing this for like half his screen time without saying dialogue. And it kind of makes you start to wonder what was going on here, because you could fill this in, because here's the thing is, obviously Jake Johnson's character, the big problem here is that he's not that guy that's on the side and is mostly a partner in all this and has some comedic lines. No, pretty much everything Jake Johnson does in this is supposed to be kind of comedic. Kind of like if you want to go back to, say, John Hannah in the 99 movie. It's almost like he's supposed to be John Hannah's character, but he ends up more like Benny, Kevin J. O'Connor's character. Which, when you're trying, the two characters, you know, work to an extent apart, but when it's when it's trying to be one and it's more like the other, you can see where disaster is striking here. And he is really rarely funny. For the most part, he's just there to scream that they're in trouble, and his gimmick is like he repeats himself. He like says something it's supposed to be funny because he says it in anger and screaming, but then it's like he says it over and over and over again because it's supposed to be like the more he says it, maybe the funnier it'll get. Except that it's not funny the first time, and by the third time you just want to shut him up. And that's the thing here, is it starts off, it was so disappointing at first, because it was like, we had our first opening action scene before the mummy's even involved in this, and then there is when the mummy is like unearthed, and the like earth falls, and then he falls in, and then it's like, okay, I don't care how high in the credits Jake Johnson was, if he just died right now, we're probably better off. And then it's like, he's just there, and it's like, damn it. But no, we lose him very quickly. But then it turns out that the writers of this movie really loved Griffin Dunne in American Werewolf in London. And they're like, hey, we can do that with Jake Johnson, right? I hate to surprise you here, but it doesn't have the same effect. Not in any way, shape, or form. So, because there was the whole thing about Griffin Dunne and American Werewolf in London is it was so darkly comedic every time he'd pop up and come back and just act like his normal self, despite the fact that he was heavily decayed and gross looking. And then he got worse as it went. Here, Jake Johnson pops up, has some zombie makeup on, and is still acting like his fucking self. And when I say that, I mean the unfunny, repeating stuff, not working guy. And it never changes. And then where his character ends up by the end of this, in the very last scene, is just a big old fuck you to this. But anyway, I think I've spent too much time on this character I hate. As far as Cruise goes, I do think, like I said, Cruise can bring it in just about anything. It's the writing that really does him in here. He's got some really not so great shit to do here that he's got to pass off for this character. And the character's kind of confusing too, because he's like half action hero, half guy in over his head, and it just kind of flip-flops when need be about which one he is at which time. And he's also supposed to be largely comedic as well, which I don't know. He can make it work a lot better than Jake Johnson does, I will say that. But as far as our villainess goes, who is, you probably recognize her, she was Gazelle in Kingsman, as well as, I believe, Jayla in Star Trek Beyond. And she does what she can, for sure. I think the main problem here is her look. It's not even her look is fine with, like, the writing and stuff. It's the fact that it's kind of like, remember in Star Trek Beyond when she had the makeup that made her look almost like the zebra print almost? Well, here it's almost like they want to cover her face again, but it's like animated over her. It's kind of like Dan Stevens in Beauty and the Beast, only that's kind of like what she looks like all over and not just her face. And it really kind of takes away from any effect that this character as a villain would have. So that's kind of a bummer. And they do a lot of the... well, here's the thing. There are a lot of jump scares, but I say jump scares in, like, a mechanical sense, and they work like jump scares. I'm not necessarily saying they have that effect, where there is the long silence, and then we build up, and then something, you know, jumps up, or makes a loud noise, or comes out of nowhere, or something like that. I don't know if it was the volume in my theater, or if it was just extremely ineffective, but the weird thing about it is that you could tell they were supposed to be jump scares, but they really weren't that loud. Now, of course, if they were loud, I would still be mad, but the fact that they're not makes me wonder, it's like, could they not even commit to that, really? Or if maybe the volume in my theater was just low, because, like I said, none of them are even, like, in effect. Like, you see the whole... Like, there's the thing where there's a rotted, down-to-the-bone corpse, and this, you know, oblivious dude comes in with a flashlight, and then gets closer and closer and closer and closer to it, and just leans in as close as he possibly can to this thing that must smell like the worst thing in the world, to where you should just instantly be projectile vomiting at the smell of this thing, but just get down as close as you possibly can, because that thing's gonna come to life sooner or later. So we have that shit in there, but... yeah, it's really not to any effect, even when they do that, like one way or the other. Not in a way to startle you into, God, what a cheap move, or even startle you in a, oh, that's effective or got me way. It's just, they're just in there because it's like they're supposed to be, and they don't really have the effect one way or the other. I do like this movie better than it sounds. It might be one of those movies that the more I think about it, the more I realize problems with it, but in the meantime... I really don't think it's near as bad as it's being built up to be, as I said. I do think Russell Crowe is a really good choice for Jekyll and Hyde. It is very much like, it's watching Russell Crowe in this is basically, and you kind of get the idea in your head of what he would be like in the role before you actually see it, and it's basically what you'd expect. It's kind of like, 1 minute you're just minding your business watching A Beautiful Mind, and then suddenly somebody comes in and changes the channel and says, fuck this, we're watching Romper Stomper. And then that's pretty much what it is. I do think, because one of the great things about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde movies in the past By the way, Frederick March's portrayal in the 1932 movie is like one of the best performances in the history of the world, if you can find it. And he tied with Wallace Beery, but he did win an Oscar for it. Please check that out, by the way. But on Russell Crowe's thing here, it's one of the interesting things, and one of the things that made Hyde so startling before was his makeup, obviously. It looks kind of cheesy in the older movies, sure. But there was always something startling, and sometimes it's completely different, like in that movie, or sometimes it's, I think in the Spencer Tracy movie, it was only like, you could still tell it was him, but it was just altered. But here it's so obvious, you know, just very average, as you would expect, you know, CGI stuff done to him, where it just looks like Russell Crowe with a slightly darker face. And more menacing eyes. That's, but he still manages to make it work performance-wise, I think. And it would be interesting to see what he would. It's really interesting to see what he'd do with a full movie. But here, at least more screen time, sure. But in the meantime, I do like what he's doing, and it would be nice if we get at least a little bit enough to see what else he would do with that. What else? I do also like that whole. There are little details in here that I do like a lot. Like going on Hyde, I like that when he's in that room, he has the handprint ID, and Hyde actually has, where Jekyll has a handprint ID that can get him in and out, Hyde's keeps him in. And I thought that was a really cool detail. And then there's stuff in a lot of the action scenes, like the scene in this that's really right out of Paranorman, when they're in the van and they keep getting... are we calling them mummies? Is that what they are? The things are jumping out at them. And there's a lot in this scene that I really like, just as far as little details in the action-wise, like the moment when he's driving, or they're either driving or they're about to drive off, and we see the reflection of one in the window running up just before it actually breaks through and attacks him. I do think it's a really cool moment when he falls out the window of the van as it's flipping, and then it goes right over him, just as it's rolling down the hill. Then there is, they make it a little bit, you know, campy and comedic, like when he's trying to fight them, but his arms and legs just break through their skulls or their bodies or whatever, and he gets stuck while he's fighting them. And so it does have moments like that, particularly in the action scenes, to where it's not taking itself too seriously. Like, it wants to go in the dark universe, but it's still going to be comedic. It probably is to a fault when you look at, say, Jake Johnson. I know I'm wallowing, but... and so... But also, there is the complaint that the effects are kind of uneven, too, because I was talking about, like, Russell Crowe's Hyde is relatively bland for as good as he is in it, and then there is what the mummy herself looks like. But then there's also a lot of really good stuff in here, like I said, like the plane scene. It's mostly where, when you can tell they pretty much went as practical as they could, predictably you can tell that's where it mostly, you know, is above the above level. But there are also times where it does look very fake and animated, and the effects are kind of uneven. But as I was saying, I know it sounds like that I don't really think much of this, but as far as it goes, I do think it's fine for what it is. I do think it's really, really getting blown out of proportion. I think that's a lot to do with the fact that people didn't think it needed rebooted. There's a lot of people that much prefer, you know, Stephen Sommers' movie. There's the purists who go all the way back to Karloff who think it should have stopped there. And just... yeah, but like I said, obviously going through all this, I can understand if people just legitimately do not like it. I totally get that, but I do think it's also, I know after saying it, I don't really care for the Sommers movies. I do think that it's also, that kind of bothers me too, though, because it's like, people really play up the Stephen Sommers movies, but it's like, I don't care for the first one he did, but I understand very much why people like it. The Mummy Returns is an absolute shit pile, and Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, Rob Cohen took over, and it had, like, Yetis playing football or whatever. And It's like, this is what you wanted to continue on, this is what you said, they should have just done another one with Fraser. I don't know. But then again, this is coming from someone where I feel like I'm gonna unintentionally become this guy's apologist, but if you've watched these videos in the past 3 years, you know I mentioned earlier that Alex Kurtzman, the director, was a major writer on The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And you will notice that, like I said, it's like I'm trying to get people to say my opinion's invalid. I bashed the Summers movies, and now here I go saying this. Yes, if there is one person that seems to be able to make me love universally hated movies, it must be this guy. Because I don't love this Mummy movie by any means, but I do think it's fine. It's pretty much about what I expected as far as before the bad reviews came out. Pretty much. And then he obviously made The Amazing Spider-Man 2, which everybody absolutely hated. And I love that movie. It made my top 10 of 2014. And like I said, if you know me, you know that I'm being dead serious. That is not a joke. So it's believable to me that I can see something in this that most people probably wouldn't. So, yeah, it is certainly messy. There's a lot of bad dialogue in there. It does feel like a lot of the times they weren't quite sure. Like, there's actually a point in the movie when Tom Cruise is, like, crying and he says, "I don't know what I'm doing." And you just have this thing in the back of your head, like, who is he talking to? Is it the people off camera trying to control this movie? It totally could be. But for what it is, I think it is fine as just this. I mean, I know it's very easy to dismiss movies, and it happens all the time, where people generally watch shit action movies and try to say, oh, they're just fun, and oh, they're just what they are. And I know I typically try to drive that away, and then I go along and say it about movies like this. But yeah, as far as someone who really didn't care for the Mummy movies to begin with, I'm not even a huge fan of the one with Karloff, if I'm being honest. I guess mummies just aren't my thing. But as somebody like that, I thought this was okay. And perfectly, I mean, there's tons of action in it. And like I said, you know Cruise is devoted to making that as good as he can, and there are definitely some really good action pieces in it. And given that that's pretty much what most of the movie is, I find it hard to say this movie is totally at fault in, like, all aspects. So, yeah, I'm fine with it. Like I said, I might think about it more over time, and because I'm fresh off of it now, like, I just saw it. So it's, you know, it could devolve into, well, this, like I was this kind to Suicide Squad when I reviewed it. Now, every time I talk about Suicide Squad, I'm talking about something I hate about it. Even though I still think it's fine. So it'll probably be in that Suicide Squad territory. So that recommendation really depends on who you are. But, yeah, that's what it is. I think it's just kind of right here in the middle, and I'm okay with it. So that's what that is. As far as really anticipated, I struggle to say horror, but in that kind of area, I will be seeing something and reviewing it next week. Obviously, the movie that comes out Friday is Cars 3, but I will be out of town for the weekend, including that Friday, so I will not see Cars 3, but sometime in the middle of this week, there is something else that came out with The Mummy, and that is It Comes at Night, which I will be seeing in the middle of the week, and you'll get that review in the same place, in place of Cars 3, so, and I might see Cars 3 down the road, if it doesn't matter. I mean, it will, but whether it matters to you, whatever. So, yes, that's what we have to look forward to, and then obviously, we've had the death of Adam West happen today, so I think I'm going to change the verses from what it was and do that the following week, and I'm going to do another one this week, so, or next week. So, yes, that's what's going on, and of course we're getting close to the end of Fargo, so we have that to look forward to as well, so, yeah, that's what this is. This is about as jumbled as the movie itself is, but as I am with that, I'm okay with that, so we're done here.